welcome to the 5th Annual Guild of Music Supervisors State of Music in Media Conference.
Well, first of all, I'm really excited about this. Neil and I have been speaking for the last few days, and I view, your tenure as being a really key part of an organization that has gotten so big and so massive. And I'm curious about when you look back of how you started out. You were a musician. In your early days when you were a musician, do you feel like the industry that you had in front of you, did you understand what that world was and you kind of moved into it? Or do you think it was something that you almost learned trying to be a musician and figuring out, how do I do this? How does this world work?
It's a good question. Before I answer, I want to congratulate Thomas on his term as the head of this organization, which he's been doing for 2 years. Look at what's happened and what continues to happen. So congratulations to you. I have so many friends in this part of the business. It was Maureen Crow, who I met many years ago, who had the vision and frankly the tenacity to get this rolling in a very tough environment. And she's a dear friend, so congratulations to her. The incoming head of the organization's another friend, Joel C. High. I don't know if Joel's here, but I told you I was going to tell a quick little story, which is the only bad thing about the story is it means I'm an old person. But when I moved to Los Angeles in 1979, I had a house and was living there with, at the time, my wife, and she had 2 little kids from previous marriage, and they were going to a local school. Eventually, they went to Crossroads, and they'd bring their friends home, and I'd meet some of the parents and so on. And incredibly, I met Joel because he was friends with some of the kids that were living in the house at the time, and I'm so proud to see him now take the helm here, and he's just a terrific young man. And then finally, just for fun, Thomas, if you want to read what this card says, but particularly the address, I think is interesting.
So it says here, this is Neil Portnow, RCA, Division Vice President. The address is 6363 Sunset Boulevard, which I believe is the building we're in right now, which means that we are visiting your home. And I want to thank you for permission for enjoying your wonderful home.
1979, I was moved out here by RCA to be head of the A&R department at vice presidential level, which was astounding for a young guy in his 20s. But what was so cool about this building was, it was an amazing building, but it had recording studios in it. So what a great thing to come out here and then be able to go downstairs from my office and make music. Anyhow, I wanted to get that in before we got to your question. When I started, it was just about hearing music, seeing music. My family appreciated music. I had an uncle that was a violinist. My mom played a little piano, nothing that serious. But they took me, when I lived in Long Island, the local high school hosted a local symphony orchestra. And it was made up of musicians in the community. And so I was 5 probably, and went kicking, dragged, and screaming to this classical music concert in an auditorium, maybe, twice the size of this. And hearing a full orchestra live blew my mind, I would say. And so that sort of was the beginning. And then in those days, families would sit around and watch television, and the big show on Sunday night, the really big show, was the Ed Sullivan Show. And so we'd watch Ed Sullivan, and you'd see the guys spinning plates, and you'd see the magicians and all of that. But then out walks this guy with a guitar and slick back hair. His name was Elvis Presley, and I thought I was going to lose my mind, and thought that's what I need to do. And by the time I was 6.5, I had nudged my parents to the point where they said, yes, okay, you can have guitar lessons. And that was the beginning of the journey. To your question, never in a million years was I thinking about necessarily a career in the business of music, and certainly nothing having anything to do with the Grammys or the Academy. That was an evolutionary kind of process.
And you were also president of your student organization at George Washington. In a way, that's an interesting thing. You were probably 21, 22, something like that? Yeah, and you're in a position where you're kind of playing leadership. You're adapting into a new role. Was that a very natural thing at that time? Did you feel a sense that that was something that you wanted to do, or did you kind of just, it stumbled upon you?
I think I had two passions as a kid. One was the music, that happened pretty quickly, but I also grew up in a house where there was political interest and social interest in social issues because my grandparents had immigrated from Russia. My parents grew up very poor, the Depression era folks from nothing really, and so they were interested in the politics of the day. So I always had a passion for that, and I actually thought, as much as I love music, it sort of evolved that I wasn't sure I was going to be able to actually have a career in music, and so the other path that I had in mind was actually to run for office and to do things in politics that would be doing good in the world and in society. So I pursued that path. I was playing music. I was the first guitar player to weasel my way into the elementary school orchestra. The orchestra, the head of the department said, well, we don't have parts for guitar for the orchestra, so I don't know where to put you. And I talked to my guitar teacher, who was going to be private lessons. He said, bring home the violin parts, I'll write chord changes in there. And I did that, and I went back to the head of the department, and I said, here. And it became, undeniable. They couldn't deny me the chance to be in the orchestra. So I was the first kid to be a guitar player in the orchestra. So that was that side. But also, at the same time, even prior to GW, in high school, I was what we call GO, General Organization Student Body President. So I was pursuing that course of leadership and involvement and sort of public consciousness even back in high school. So the GW piece was a logical extension. By the time I got to college, I'd had a lot of experience in music. I wasn't convinced that I had a career that was going to be stellar. I was a musician. I was okay. Wasn't sure that that was how it was going to work. I did think, though, that if I went to law school and learned that trade, that I perhaps could actually run for office. Didn't play out that way either, but that gave me that background.
Well, mentors play a huge role as people come up. And, I view it in many ways. When you think about who people come up with, they repeat a lot of the habits of their mentors. Sometimes they're good habits, sometimes they're bad habits, depending on the mentor. Do you remember specific mentors that you had that kind of gave you lessons that helped you on that pathway that kind of clicked?
Well, quite a few. Teachers, you all, I think, understand the value of a great teacher. And frankly, the best teachers that I had in general were either in music or in sort of political science, those kinds of things. So my first guitar teacher, when I started at age 6, whose name, I love his name, and I actually mentioned it in one of my remarks during the Grammys because it was life-changing for me. His name was Stanley Solo. Wow. S-O-L-O-W. And Stan Solo would come to my house in his suit and tie and bring his guitar. And my objective was to be Elvis at the point, which was fine. But he was much more broadly educated about music. So eventually, and I had my record player, as Joe Biden talked about the other day. I had and on the record player, Mr. Solo would bring LPs for me to hear. And so he would bring Andre Segovia, and he would bring Wes Montgomery, and he would bring Joe Pass. And so this was very enlightening and very exciting to me. And so that opened up a whole new thinking about music, and I became very passionate about jazz and classical music. I went to see Segovia at Town Hall, and I still have the autograph, and I remember shaking that fat little hand of his that was extraordinary, and going to Birdland and seeing jazz artists and so on, and getting phony proof, so I was old enough to get in the door. So right there was a pivotal moment. In my professional career, I could give you a list of people. The first person who hired me for a job was a man named Erwin Schuster, who was at Screen Gems Music. Screen Gems was later acquired by EMI and is now one of the largest music publishers on the planet. Erwin saw some promise and gave me a job. Mike Berniger, who was at RCA at the time, was a staff producer. Mike had done Barbra Streisand's first records at Columbia. He saw talent in me as a producer and gave me that opportunity. And then some of the famous people that I worked for, Alan Livingston, who ran Capitol Records and signed the Beatles, was running the music department at 20th Century Fox when I was running their label, and he was very instrumental in teaching me a lot of how you behave and what to do. Clive Davis at Arista Records, legendary. I don't have to talk too much about that, but you all know who he is and you know his legacies. But 3 years running the West Coast for Clive was very instrumental and very helpful. And then the last job that I had was the Zamba Group of companies, which was the largest independent music company in the world in 1989 when I started. And when I left to go to the Academy and the company was sold, it was sold for 2.7 billion. That's B with a B. And Clive Calder, the founder and private owner of the company, was the person that I worked with and reported to. And he's probably one of the brightest, most insightful people I've ever worked for. And taking all that I learned from all of them really helped to inform everything that I've done all along the way.
And I imagine there's a very different culture from New York industry to West Coast industry, and you've grown up in New York, so, and I'm from Boston, and I know that when I moved to the West Coast, the first few years was really trying to acclimate to the culture, to understand sort of what my role could be. I'm curious about how your process was of that whole switch.
Well, I didn't want to come here. Actually, it was, I was very happy in New York. I had my family and friends, girlfriend, my band. I brought this for fun too. Can't see much, but here's the Savages. Don't you think I would be a savage? So here we are in a tree wearing suits and ties. It's kind of Beatlesque. And,
Potentially playing in the Ivar Theater later now.
Well, we are opening for the Grammys next year because the band is back together actually, but I'm in the bottom of the tree because I wasn't climbing up in the middle of the winter in this tree with my Fender bass. But in any case, I had not a lot of desire to come here, and it was very early in my career, so I didn't know anybody. I'd been to LA once because as an independent producer, I'd produced a single that became a top 30 chart record, and when that happened, at that stage of the industry, you'd get a call from Dick Clark to be on American Bandstand. So we got that call and out we came. I came to do that. I did one road trip from college, but I had no desire whatsoever. It was a job transfer, and I remember the gentleman, another mentor, a fellow named Mel Ilberman, who was head of business affairs. He was taking 2 young people from RCA and promoting them to run A&R. There had been an administrative change. It was time to pass the torch, and so I thought I was out. I was looking for another job, frankly, and he came to myself and another gentleman who was in New York, who was a producer, who was running the publishing company, and he said to the other guy, whose name was Warren Schatz, he said, "Warren, you're an animal, so you can deal with the tough, rough and tumble New York." And he looked at me and he said, "You're a little more mellow, you're a little more mild-mannered, so we need someone in LA. You go and sort of deal with sort of the airheads out in LA, and you'll probably do well." And kicking and screaming, I really didn't want to do it, but I made a deal with Mel, which was, "Mel, I'll take the job, but if I hate it," I thought I was so smart, I negotiated this deal. "If I hate it, you and the company will pay for me to come back to New York and send my stuff back. So you buy me a ticket and you'll ship my stuff. And he said, done. And I thought I was a genius. I hope you make better deals than that when you're talking about your future. But the bottom line was I came out and never looked back. It's the best thing I ever did. But yes, the acclimation was different because in New York it's all centralized in the city. A different vibe. And out here was everywhere and sort of a different kind of a thing. It took a little while. I lived enough in the suburbs, I think, which helped me deal with it, but never look back. Best thing I ever did.
Tell me about the Recording Academy. I mean, we talked about this earlier. I'm a big fan of always promoting from within. I think that there's something so important about being able to see talent early and cultivate it and have people invested in the organizations as they go. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what first drew you to the Recording Academy and sort of how you were ushered through that whole process?
Well, my first encounter with the Academy was living in New York, being a musician, having a band, and like so many, having the dream of someday getting a Grammy or winning a Grammy. In the infinite wisdom of the Academy, that never happened. And that wouldn't have exactly been a good look based on what, we were okay, but it wasn't anything great. But that was the impetus to join, and I had the credentials to do it. I produced enough, had enough released. So I joined the New York chapter of the Academy and became a volunteer, which I did for several decades, actually, including when I moved out here to Los Angeles. So I'd been aware of and cognizant of the Academy and its work, but as far as staff and promoting and creating a team, I'd been at many different companies over the course of the year, and I always felt that somebody who gave me a shot was a critical part of my career. And if I had any self-esteem or value in my own work, it was because someone saw that and gave me the chance. So I always felt that was a great starting point for anything in terms of any company that I worked in and anybody that I would work with. So over the course of the years, that's been my MO. If I'm starting something new, obviously you go and try to find people that you know and that you respect, or you have your meetings and try to make good judgments. If you're going someplace that's an existing organization, for me, step one was meeting those people, spending time with them. And I'm not talking about a week or two, I'm talking about a substantial amount of time. Find out who they are, what they know, what they can do. But also, for me personally, to understand what I know, but more importantly, what I don't know. Because a great manager, frankly, is someone that knows what they do and what they do well, but equally important, recognizes what they don't know and where they need help. And when you are self-aware to do that, and if your ego doesn't get in the way about that, then what you want to do is surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. I'm sure you've heard this comment before, but there are certain things I know very little about, wouldn't proclaim to have a clue about, nor have necessarily a deep need to know about. What I do need is to have people around me that do have that knowledge base. So my favorite story, I guess, about staff is at the Zama Group. When we started, I was hired as one person with the ability to hire an assistant. I did that. We started in offices at the corner of Highland and Hollywood Boulevard, in the bank building across the street from that whole complex. At the time, none of the rest was there, and behind us was an empty parking lot with a crack house. It wasn't exactly a great neighborhood. But that's where we started, and we got to the point in the growth of the company where we were having people come in and we needed a receptionist. And so here I am starting an LA-based company. Home base is New York and London, and I've got a green light to hire someone at the front desk. And a month and a half goes by, maybe 2 months go by, and the people in New York are saying, well, where the heck's the receptionist? You haven't hired anybody yet. Are you having a problem? And I said, I'm not having a problem. I'm just being selective, because the person at that front desk, and who's also going to answer the phones, is going to be the first impression that anybody has of the Zamba group of companies. We're not exactly a brand that's well known in LA. Everybody would say Zamba, what's that? Is that a dance or something? So I had to build a brand from scratch. This is the face to the world. So it needs to be somebody that's very buttoned up, number one. Number two, best case scenario, this is somebody over the course of time that becomes management of the Zamba group in Los Angeles. And so that's exactly what happened. I found somebody that was fantastic, and she, over the course of time within the company, became a senior executive at Jive Records, which was part of the Zamba group. And then she was poached by Columbia Records, where she was a vice president of marketing and moved to New York and had, that sort of a career. But those are the best stories, because aside from being an A&R person, it's great to find talent. It's the most exciting thing when you find an artist and you're right. In other words, you give that opportunity, but the public embraces the talent, and that's the best feeling in the world. Almost equally as satisfying is finding people who work with you that become executives and ultimately run the business that we're in. So I'm a fan of that. At the Academy, that was my approach. Some of the people that were interning there are now running the company. And yes, of course, I had to recruit and bring people in along the way, but I think that's a formula for success.
And when you think about the size and the scale of the Grammys, especially the Grammy Awards, I would imagine that as the event grew, you had new challenges, and those people who were given sort of their first shot on maybe a small scale are now growing into new responsibilities, and you really test their ability to grow with the organization. How do you manage something that is obviously at the scale of that? And one of the things that's always interesting to me is we're dealing with musicians. Musicians are mercurial, moody, complicated people, and I would imagine that you have to almost cultivate a team of people who can handle diplomacy, hospitality, empathy, among other things. Have you found that to be sort of an interesting challenge, and have a lot of people come up through the ranks who've been succeeding in those roles?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the secret weapon for me at the Academy is just my background. So being a musician, being in bands, having had recording contracts, having produced recordings for others, having so much experience and understanding from the label and publishing side gives me a little insight into artists and their needs and wants and mentality and successes and struggles and so on. So I have an empathy, I think, which is unique and very helpful. From there, it's really about setting the tone for the rest of the organization. So if I have the benefit of that, what I need to do is to make sure that my staff and the team really understand as best they can that, and then it's by example, sort of leadership by what is the tone, how does the head of the organization deal with managers and artists and the community and the labels and so on. And again, here's where the politics was helpful, because it's part of what you learn and what you need to do if you're going to be in service, how to sort of be a good listener. Listening is very important, and if you listen and you process and you're open-minded and you're fair, people respect that. It may disagree, but they respect that. So I think my team ultimately took on that tone, and as I was saying to you, Thomas, sort of laughingly, during Grammy Week, which is, it's not only the Grammy show, it's a week of events and activities, and much like what you're doing here today, but multiply it by 7,000 and the scale and so on. So people would see me along the way during the week, and I'd have every day there'd be 4 speeches and meetings and press conferences and so on and so forth. And someone would say, "Well, Neil, you look so calm, and how is that?" And my joke answer would be, "Well, it's the medication, obviously." But the truth of the matter is, my answer would be, when you have the A+ team at your side and surrounding you, you don't lose sleep because they don't fail. It's impossible for them to fail. Those things that are out of your control, that you cannot manage, are out of control. But we're going to manage through it the best we can, and we know that anything that we do manage is going to be at a high level of integrity, and that's what we've been able to accomplish, something certainly we're very proud about.
I mean, you mentioned public speaking, and that's an interesting thing. Even in my own experiences of it, I'm very cognizant of the fact that, just having what you view as being a positive, constructive, and open-minded spirit doesn't necessarily always translate, and a lot of times people can take things out of context. I'm curious a little bit about your experiences with that whole process, and how do you handle those situations when you know that you are trying to articulate things and that things are simply pulled out of context, or simply putting you in a spot where you have to now be defensive, which can also be difficult because then your defensiveness comes across and suddenly you feel like you're digging a hole that you hadn't even dug in the first place.
It's a great question. I mean, I think my response to that question is that, and not to sound like, an old person, and I resist trying to be characterized that way, even though I'm not a kid. But the fact is that times have changed. And when I first started doing things in a public speaking capacity, and I studied it. I was a communications major. I studied audience psychology, debate, communications, and things of that nature. Yes, it was true every word counted, and it was true that there are going to be disagreements, and it was certainly true that people were going to have a different perspective and certainly be vocal about it. But you did not have the gotcha mentality that we have today, and you did not have social media. Social media has created an environment, and in many ways, it's a great blessing and certainly the future, and it takes down walls and it makes all kinds of communication ubiquitous, and it's a wonderful side. The other side, though, is that it creates a certain boldness. It emboldens people who, in an anonymous fashion, to say anything that crosses their mind. There is not much in the way of a filter, and we sort of are in a time here of certainly not a lot of giving the benefit of a doubt to the other person. And I think that's unfortunate because in earlier times, I would want to be prepared for what I was saying, and I would want to be prepared and make sure that I knew the topic, and I would certainly give a lot of thought to every word and how I was going to say it. And you don't have very much time, particularly if it's a press conference or an interview. You just asked me a question. I have a nanosecond to process what I want to say. So I am certainly aware of that and work hard to give good, intelligent answers. But today, in the times that we live in, anybody that's in a public-facing place is in a different situation because everybody is looking for a gotcha moment. The way that journalism works today is not necessarily about facts or truth, but finding a way to find a word, a sentence that can be taken out of context, amplified, blown up, turned into a headline, and then become clickbait for those that want to see something that is sensationalistic. So frankly, a lot of the fun about public speaking and being able to be candid and to be open with your thoughts for anybody in the public space, whether it's somebody that runs an organization, somebody that runs a company, somebody that's running for office, I think it's unfortunate because you spend so much time thinking about not finding yourself in a place where you've said something that you know what you meant, but is taken out of context, and so then you're off point. Then you're talking about being defensive, as you say, Thomas, and really not talking about the point, which could be something very important that's being discussed. So, it's not as much fun and some of the joys out of it, but that is the world we live in, and anybody that's going to be in a leadership role has to be prepared to be front and center and to take the heat if and when those things happen. And many of you know that happened to me almost 2 years ago, and it was very difficult on a personal level to go through because something out of context, something that wasn't meant the way it was reported, sort of a reaction to it. Again, in social media, reaction's pretty swift, not much time is spent to do the research or to understand the background and the context. So, that was hard. On the other hand, my thinking about it was, okay, I said what I said. I wasn't happy that it was reported out of context. However, what the important part of that is, let it be a teaching moment. So it's a teaching moment for me because I can hear the anguish or the difficulty that people may have felt by something that I said, even though it wasn't meant to be that way. I need to learn from that, but beyond that, what do we as an organization, what do we as an industry want to take away from that? And so what I did there was to create a task force, and we're talking about diversity and inclusion and women's ability to have fair opportunity in the music industry. And we've done some things that are tangible to move that in the right direction. And I hope that the industry picks that up and continues to work on it, because it is a major issue. And that's the issue we should be talking about, not the sound bites.
I mean, tied to that, Musicares to me is something which has come at such an important time. The music industry obviously went through a massive change, and entire aspects of the industry just folded. Musicians suddenly had no safety net. Whatever income they once had disappeared. And it seems that some of the charitable organizations that the Academy has done, under your leadership, have had really key roles in being able to help give some sort of a cushion for artists who've fallen on hard times. I mean, the number of times I've gone to benefits of artists who were in a car accident and suddenly realized they had no health insurance, they have massive costs, and now not only are they not able to pursue what they want to do, but it's potentially bankrupting their family. Can you talk a little bit about some of the charitable things that you've done as far as Musicares and other organizations?
Sure, and we've had different pillars as I identified of the organization. So just quickly, advocacy been a big part of what we've done at the Academy, and we're very proud that the Music Modernization Act finally has passed. If we had more time, I would talk a little bit about our role in that and my role in that, but a very proud accomplishment, much more to do, but that was a really wonderful thing that happened. Our music education, archiving, and preservation is another piece that lives now in the Grammy Museum. For those of you that haven't been, I urge you to take a trip downtown and check it out. Not only is it great to see the stuff that's there and all the interactive programs, but we put over 150,000 kids a year through the museum to learn about music and careers and so on and so forth. So we're very proud of that. And we have 3 other museums around the country. There's one in New Jersey, there's one in Cleveland, Mississippi. I was just talking with my friend David Porter about being close to Memphis there in the blues, home of the blues. And we have a Grammy Museum piece in Nashville, Tennessee, and there are others being discussed and in the works. And then there's Musicares, which is what I call philanthropy and charity for our own. When you think about our community, most people in music, with few exceptions, are independent. They don't work for companies, they don't have jobs, they don't have all the perks and benefits of that. So whether it's healthcare, whatever it might be, the fact is, what do you do if you have a problem or you have a crisis on a personal level? Where do you go? And when I started, Musicares had been in existence for a few years. The Academy started that because we found out that the amazing jazz band leader and clarinetist Woody Herman, and you can look him up, he's a legendary musician. When he passed away, he was destitute, he had no money. Family didn't have enough money to bury him. And we thought as an organization, well, how can that possibly be? That's not right. And we looked at across the way at our sister organization, who was 25 years ahead of us and older, the Motion Picture Academy, and they had a home for actors and people in that industry that fell on hard times, and they had programs and so on. And we thought, we need to do that. We're the right people to do it because we represent the whole creative community. So Musicares was started. When I came in, it was fledgling and we were doing good work and relatively small. I took a napkin. I remember at some lunch or dinner, and I made a list of the people I hope we could honor, because we have a Person of the Year dinner the Friday night before the Grammys, and that's about a $7 million night in terms of the gross income that comes in, and all that money goes to help music people. So we've been able to do that over the years. Musicares helps anybody that is legitimately in the music community, whether you're a musician or roadie, an employee, working at a company, and it's anonymous and confidential, so nobody has to be embarrassed about putting your hand up. And it could be as simple as you're the drummer in a band, you're out in the morning to go get some milk for the kids, you missed that first step, that one right there. Damn it, I twisted my ankle, I can't play now for a month until I'm better. What am I gonna do? And you call Musicares, and they do a very quick application, and we will come in and we'll pay your mortgage, we'll pay for food on the table, we'll make sure your car is running until you're back on your feet. That's a very basic level. When Katrina hit in the Gulf and New Orleans was wiped out, it's a big music community, what did they do? And so we went in, I authorized $1 million immediately from the Academy to go into New Orleans and help the music community there. So there, it's about keeping people alive as they're recovering, but also the musicians that work at the local restaurant, well, the restaurant's not gonna be open until it gets rebuilt. What are they gonna do? So we were able to support them. What about the musicians who lost all their instruments? Because how are they gonna make a living when the restaurant opens if they don't have an instrument to play? We replaced instruments. So we created sort of what we call the Musicares Crisis Fund. And so we have, every time there's been a natural disaster, we've been there. When the floods were in Nashville, when you had the storms in New Jersey, when you had the terrible tragedy in Las Vegas with the mass killings there, our role there was very different. We immediately sent trauma counselors for all the musicians and all the crew and everybody that was there that had to live through that will have this in their minds and hearts forever, who need help. And so that's the kind of work we did there. And then there's the third level of what we do, which is what I'll call life-saving. So we have a significant addiction recovery and substance abuse program. So in that case, we have health and human services specialists and managers who are saving lives. They take phone calls 24/7. We have a network around the country of people who are in recovery. Any musician or anybody that's supporting a musician anywhere in America that's on tour, that's feeling a little weak and having, those compelling issues that come up when you suffer with these kinds of problems, we have someone that will call and will talk to you and come out. We have safe harbor rooms at events. So with the Grammys and television shows, that's where there's a lot of pressure. So if you're in recovery, those are the times when you're most tempted. We have a room that's private, anonymous, quiet, where you can go with others. You can do your 12-step work, you can meditate, you can find a safe harbor kind of a thing. And so that program has literally saved lives. And so over the course of the time that we've been doing this, we put over $60 million into the community to help for these kinds of things, and literally hundreds of thousands of people, who call them clients, have been helped by Musicares services. So the bottom line to all of this, I could go to bed any night during my tenure there, and the worst business thing could happen, or the most difficult problem might occur, but I could go to bed every night knowing that somewhere across the country, we were helping somebody, whether it was a kid to learn about music, whether it was somebody that needed help with substance abuse, whether it was someone that was trying to archive a project or create a project that music helps unborn children, whatever that might be. We had all of that going on, or whether we were in Washington helping some of you get the fair compensation you deserve. So it's really a wonderful organization. It's been a great ride, and something that I cherish.
I think that's kind of a perfect place to close it. Ladies and gentlemen, Neil Portnow.